Jason walked into his office building and greeted his colleague. "How's everything going, Matt?" "Great," Matt replied, settling into his seat behind the reception desk. Jason owned a small construction company in Monroe, Louisiana. Sipped his coffee while reviewing the progress of his current project. It was early, just 9 a.m., when a woman entered the office. "Hi, I'm Wilma Anderson. I live in the Garden District here in Monroe. I'd like to repair my basement. It's old and has been locked up for as long as I can remember," she said. That's no problem. My team and I can handle the job with ease," Jason assured her. "Great. Thank you so much. I don't know much about how these things work, but it should be straightforward. All is I want for you to clean up down there, fix the plumbing, and leave the rest of the space open." "Mrs. Anderson, you need not worry. Everything will be done exactly how you want it," Jason promised. Jason checked his schedule, but unfortunately, all his workers were occupied with another project. He wouldn't have an opening until 2 weeks later. "All right, Mr. Anderson, we can start the project next month," he said. "What? No. I need this done urgently," she insisted. "Mrs. Anderson, I'm sorry, but it's just not possible. I'm working on another project at the moment, and you can't expect me to stop midway." Despite Jason's explanations, Mrs. Anderson continued to press for immediate action. Her insistence was perplexing, and Jason watched in surprise as she pulled out a wad of bills and placed it onto the table. "Here, this is double the money for the project. I'm willing to pay triple if you'll start by tomorrow," she said. Jason sighed. "All right, Mrs. Anderson. I'm not making any promises just yet. I'll call you later today and let you know." Later that day, Jason called Mrs. Anderson to inform her that he and his team would start working on her basement the following day. After discussing the matter with Matt, who was intrigued by the generous offer for such a small project, Jason decided to postpone his other projects and divide his workers into 2 teams for convenience. The next morning, Jason and his team arrived at Mrs. Anderson's house. She asked them to wait while she went to her room. Moments later, she returned fumbling with a bunch of keys. She led them downstairs and began unlocking the basement door. Jason was taken aback by the number of locks and deadbolts on the door. It took Mrs. Anderson 10 minutes to sort through her keys and open each lock. The first day was dedicated to inspection, to determine what repairs needed to be done and what materials would be required. When Mrs. Anderson opened the basement door, a strong, damp odor filled the air. She held her nose and said, "No one has been down here in so many years. Almost 20. "Wow," Jason remarked. "Based on the odor, I suspect there must be mold inside." Mrs. Anderson left the men to their work and went back upstairs. Jason entered the dark basement, searching for the lights. He soon found a switch and flipped it. but the light bulb flickered weakly. The illumination was poor and inconsistent, casting eerie shadows across the room. Despite the dim lighting, Jason could see bats perched on the ceiling and hear the scurrying of rats in the corners. His team got to work immediately, but within an hour, they discovered major issues with the basement's electrical system. Jason, though not an electrician, had basic knowledge of wiring. Despite his efforts, the lights continued to flicker and sometimes went out entirely. The team managed to complete the day's work using their flashlights, since their main task was to clear out the junk. The next day, Jason arrived at the house at 8 a.m. with some of the necessary supplies. He planned to finish the day's work by 8 p.m. The team made significant progress, but the electrical issues persisted. Around 6 p.m., Jason's truck arrived with the remaining materials. He sent his co-workers upstairs to check the delivery, while he stayed behind to finish up some tasks and joined them later. As everyone headed upstairs, leaving Jason alone in the basement, he cautiously turned the knob on a pipe. Suddenly, there was a loud blast, and the lights went out. Jason shrugged and pulled out his flashlight, heading towards the electrical panels. After struggling for about 10 minutes, he couldn't resolve the problem. Then, from the far corner of the room, Jason heard a strange noise. Assuming it was Matt returning, he called out, "Hey, we need to call in an electrician. It's not possible to work like this." There was no reply, but the clanging chains sound persisted. "Matt, is that you?" Jason called again. Turning around, Jason swept his flashlight across the room, but found no one there. He scratched his head, puzzled by the noise. Just as he turned back, a croaking sound startled him. He swung his flashlight around again, demanding, "Who's there?" Jason's flashlight began to flicker, and the battery seemed to be dying. His anxiety grew as the light dimmed, and soon he was in complete darkness. Realizing he wasn't alone made him uneasy. He pulled out his lighter, its small flame barely illuminating a 2-foot radius around him. With this scant light, he cautiously made his way toward the exit. The basement was eerily silent, save for Jason's own breathing. His hands trembled as he took small, deliberate steps towards the door. He scanned the shadows, his heart racing. Suddenly, he heard the clanging noise again. It stopped. Jason's blood ran cold when he felt a chilling presence near his neck. Cold metal chains began to constrict around him, tightening painfully. He struggled, trying to pull the chains away, but the force only increased. Just before he lost consciousness, he heard a whisper close to his ear, the voice cold and vengeful.
You can't trap me here forever.
Jason's vision blurred, and his strength gave out as the darkness engulfed him. When the power outage occurred throughout the house, Jason's team was left in the dark. Upon returning, they found Jason unconscious on the basement floor. Mrs. Anderson immediately offered assistance and instructed the workers to carry Jason upstairs. Matt, Jason's business partner, decided to stay behind with Jason at Mrs. Anderson's house, where he was alarmed to see red marks around Jason's neck. After about an hour, Jason regained consciousness. Matt, something is in the basement, Jason said, struggling to sit up. There was a power outage, Jason. Perhaps an intruder snuck in, Matt suggested. Mrs. Anderson took a deep breath, her face pale. No, Matt, there wasn't an intruder. I should have told you earlier. But I was afraid you wouldn't take the job if you knew the full truth. I desperately need the basement renovated to rid it of its evil presence. There isn't a person down there. There's something beyond this life. And knowing what it is only makes it more terrifying. I've been restless, unable to sleep because of those noises. The worst part is, I recognize them. This is my family home. And now, I live here with my children. My husband passed away a few years ago. If only he were here, maybe we could have resolved this together. But now I have no choice but to ask for your help. Please, destroy everything downstairs and build it anew. I grew up here with my family, my father, my mother, my elder brother, and me. It all started when my brother returned from a hunting trip to Green Bay, Wisconsin. He had a hobby of hunting and taxidermy. There's a whole collection of taxidermied animals in storage: deers, wolves, bears, birds, and more. After this particular trip, my brother began behaving strangely. He was enraged, hostile, and began hurling insults at everyone. When he attacked my mother, we knew something was seriously wrong. We tried to isolate him and brought in doctors, but they couldn't understand his condition. They recommended a rehabilitation center for anger management. But my mother refused. She couldn't bear to see her son confined. Despite her efforts, my brother's condition worsened. The yelling and shouting alarmed the neighbors. My father cleaned out the basement to contain the noise, but I knew there was more going on. My father had to shackle my brother to keep him from hurting himself. At night, I would hear him banging the chains against the walls. It was devastating, but I knew my parents were trying their best to help. Unfortunately, my brother passed away from his illness. But I ignored them until now. Living alone with my children, it's terrifying to think something is lurking beneath us. So you believe your late brother's restless soul is still in the basement? Matt asked. I'm not sure. He was a good person. My brother. And a good son. I find it hard to believe it's him. I'd rather think it's whatever overpowered him, Mrs. Anderson replied. Mrs. Anderson, if this is the case, I don't think renovating the basement will solve the problem. Take this card, Matt said. He's a highly knowledgeable expert. He might be able to offer you a solution. Mrs. Anderson took the card, her expression troubled. Jason, I'm really sorry for what you went through. It's all right, Mrs. Anderson. I understand what you're going through, Jason said, though he looked wary. Jason and his crew completed the basement renovation with extra caution. The job took an additional 2 days, but they finished it well. Fortunately, the issue seemed to resolve once the renovation was complete. Mrs. Anderson wanted to express her gratitude, but when she visited Jason's office 2 weeks later, she was stunned to find it shut down. Hello, Matt? I was just thinking of calling you, Mrs. Anderson said when she reached him. Mrs. Anderson, we need your help. Jason has been unwell ever since we left your house. There's something strange going on with him.
If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to my channel and share this video with your friends and family.